So here in New York City, we've had a pretty robust response to the Paris attacks. You know, hundreds of counterterrorism officers, and obviously there's a history here. I mean, Mayor Bloomberg and Ray Kelly had some pretty controversial counterterrorism intelligence programs. Under de Blasio, that supposedly has changed, and whether it's the demographics unit or the zone assessment unit. How much has it changed? You know, was there a different feeling prior to Paris in communities like Bay Ridge?
Yeah, I think that for me what comes to mind is just that kind of our deepest fears about the growth of ISIS, that foreign fighters would return home and attack, have seemingly come true. And that for a lot of people, I think that's a scary moment.
Right, because in the evolution since, I mean, obviously history didn't start with 9/11 either. I mean, you pointed out in a recent piece you wrote. But the understanding of it has been there was 9/11 was a spectacular attack, and then there was the focus on lone wolf terrorism or homegrown terrorism with like the London bombings, and now this is of a different species, and I think we're all kind of just reacting to that.
Mm-hmm. And it definitely is like it's not it's not like what happened on 9/11. It is it's much more difficult because at the end of the day it's an ideology, and it's like, how do you stop an ideology? Because you can have a young kid somewhere here in the States who's not even Muslim, who's just troubled, who's disillusioned, and says, hey, I need something to latch onto, and latches onto this in some sort of act of rebelling or whatever crazy behavior they may be engaged in.
Do you feel, I mean, you personally or all of us sort of ingesting the media, do we even understand what that ideology is? And is it different for ISIS versus Al-Qaeda? I mean, when Al-Qaeda came to prominence, the thing to understand was that this wasn't like Black September. This wasn't a group linked to some specific nationalist cause. This was about something in some ways more ambitious and a little more diffuse. Is ISIS from the same sort of school of thought? Do we even have a grasp of that?
I personally think it's pretty dangerous to say that the reason people engage in these criminal acts are because of an ideology, right? I think that there are a lot of like political contextual reasons why people are drawn to either travel to ISIS or to join the Islamic State or to return and engage in acts of violence.
What do you think, what are the driving factors?
Obviously, the decision to go to war, right? The kind of creation of political vacuums, like long-standing racism and Islamophobia against young people in Europe, and the sense that the war on terror is a war on Islam.
And I think, unfortunately, like we do such a disservice because we don't get news and information to the American public. Even before 2003, we were in Iraq in the first Gulf War, and there were hundreds of thousands of Iraqis that were killed. And and I'm in no way ever condoning or justifying any kind of violence, but I think it's important to understand how these things come to fruition and all the things that come into play, because this is what these terrorists then use to justify their actions. And they say, hey, you're killing our innocent people, and then they bring in other people and say that it is only Muslim lives that are being killed, because we're in like I believe 14 or 15 Muslim countries, whether it's through overt war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, or it's drone warfare in Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen. I mean, we're in a host of countries, so they definitely use that. And like President Obama himself said, when people are disillusioned, they cling to religion and guns. So it's very easy to get these people who have no opportunity, no sense of hope for anything, to bring them in by using religion and say, hey, they're trying to kill us all, so we need to fight back. One
of the things that came out after the Paris attacks was that few of us had paid much attention to what occurred in Beirut just a few days or a couple weeks earlier. And that's obviously a cosmopolitan city. So I guess what people in New York wonder is, the concern locally is obviously always somewhat selfish, like, are we a target? And the next question is sort of, how do you defend yourself against this stuff? if bombs don't work, and if being engaged doesn't work, and if being a cosmopolitan city doesn't work, well, what does?
But I don't think we've been engaged as we should be, because I think we have been just responding with war. Like even with 9/11, we went into Iraq that had nothing to do with it. And then once we destabilized that, that's how ISIS, like you said, the vacuum was created, and that's how ISIS came to power, spread over into Syria. And then there hasn't been any actual engagement. It's either like we've been propping up dictators, then when we don't want them, we get rid of them. And then it's just war, bombs, and people being killed. It's very difficult. I don't know what the answer is. I wish we could save the world in this segment, but I know it's not warfare, because the more you do that, the more you create more terrorism.